Hi, everyone. This is Martin Willis. Welcome to Podcast UFO for episode number 30. Today's guest is Suzanne Taylor, and the subject is crop circles. A little different than UFOs. I'm sure you'll enjoy it, though. A couple of announcements. You can follow us on Twitter, or you can like us on Facebook. Those icons are right on our website. You can contact me at martin@podcastufo.com. Since I started this podcast, there's been a couple of complaints about the intro and outro music that I have. And then some people are writing me telling me they like it. But I am going to change it eventually. You'll just have to put up with it for now. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I have Suzanne Taylor on Skype in California. How you doing, Suzanne?
Well, hi, Martin. I'm so happy to be here. I love talking about crop circles.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you on. Now, I know it's a little bit different than UFOs, this particular show, but I think crop circles are fascinating, and there could be a tie to extraterrestrials. It's hard to say. But anyway, what started you in the crop circle research?
Well, it's actually a mission of mine that developed as I was interested in how the world was not working and how violent we are, how abusive to each other, to the earth, whatever. And I was producing a lot of different kinds of programs that had to do with our consciousness, basically. How would we get to a different state of perception. And the crop circles just accidentally came along. I had a friend who had a son who was stationed in the military in England, and on his leave he would go out and take pictures. This was in the late 80s of what they were calling landing pads for UFOs. And I saw those pictures, and they were crop circles. They didn't have that name then. They weren't named till the 90s. So I saw the pictures, and I thought, wow, that's some tangible evidence of visitation, if in fact that's what they are. And, the UFO phenomenon comes and goes, but look, that's on the ground, that's staying there. And I thought, well, if that's true, and that's being delivered, by some other intelligence or coming because there is other intelligence, and they're doing whatever they're doing, and there's crop circles as a result. Wow, I thought that could really affect everybody's perception. There wouldn't be anybody on Earth if we ascertained, in fact, that this was a UFO-related kind of phenomenon. That would change everybody's perception of who we are. We have no real knowledge other than our science fiction, and then this sense that there is inexplicable UFO activity, but we haven't got the verification that there is other intelligence. And once we have that, it changes who we are. It puts us in juxtaposition to an otherness that we have nothing to juxtapose to now. Right now, it's just us at each other, And just think, though, if you absolutely know that there's other intelligence out there, it immediately affects your mind about, wow, we then become one humanity, all of us curious, interested, wondering. So we get into a one-world conversation and engagement over what to do. What is it? And it doesn't go away. It's not like today's news cycle, oh, yes, they are UFO landing pads and forgotten tomorrow. It's with us forever. And I thought, here I am producing all these programs that slowly but surely get us to become more aware, and I thought, oh my goodness, this would all over the world get everyone's attention, and it would create a kind of new playing field, new standing place for humanity. And so I pursued that interest, and I'm in Los Angeles, a crossroads of the world, where people, everybody passes through Los Angeles, including the crop circle researchers, because at the time there had started, actually in the 70s, an interest in these, whatever these things were, and they were being tracked, and they were being speculated about and studied, and material being taken into laboratories. And so I was snaring these researchers, they call themselves, to do programs about crop circles, just like I was doing things about other categories of self-awareness, personal growth. And, well, I just got further and further sold on the fact that, wow, this was so potentially important to, all of us. And 1993 was my first trip to England, and then I was really hooked. You go stand in a crop circle, and you're never the same. You stand there and you go, "Oh my, what? How did this happen?" When you're in one of the really impressive ones, the biggest one is the size of 2 football fields. I mean, really. So you picture that. It has 409 separate elements in it. And you're just in a sea of the elements all happen to be circular, although that's not true of all crop circles these days, but that one is. And you're just standing in this sea of circles as far as you can see. People to the other side of it are little dots. They're tiny. And you just can't believe the awesomeness of it. So I think it was 1996 when I got back from England that summer. And now I'm part of the kind of community of these researchers, interested parties. They gather in England every year from all over the world who write the books, they take the pictures, they produce the conferences. There's a whole industry of crop circles now. And so when I got back in 1996, I made a vow. I said, if I'm going to do anything with my life that's unique and makes a really special contribution, because I know something that most people don't know about what's going on here, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to get it out to the world. So that really kind of started my very ardent kind of producing energy going. It took me a while to find a filmmaker, but I'm the executive producer of the first feature film that ever was made about the circles that came out in 2002, called Crop Circles Quest for Truth, which is still selling well and out there, and it's kind of like it's a history of the crop circles, and it still holds today. And in fact, a lot of the people who are interested in who are researching the phenomenon now, who are those people who gather in England every summer, which is where the phenomenon has its most focused kind of situation. A lot of them came in because they saw that first movie, and so. I've just gone on from there. I got that first movie made. I found a filmmaker, and then I went to school watching him, thinking, because I had an idea really to do the passion of the circles, not the history of them, and there was a little bit of a jar there with the filmmaker who had creative control. He'd had an Academy Award nomination, which gives you a lot of cachet in Hollywood.
Sure, yeah.
He did Waco, that big documentary. Before Michael Moore and whatever, it was the 5th biggest selling documentary ever. And so he became kind of, the arbiter of what the film would be, more than the investors who were a little bit upset that he didn't do the film that we gave them money to do. But nonetheless, he did the history of the crop circles. But when it was finished, I thought, oh, wait a minute. There's the film I wanted to make, and I started making it. I started it actually in 2003. And my film is What on Earth, and the tagline is Inside the Crop Circle Mystery. And I use that line, inside the crop circle mystery, because I know all these people. This is my world. And it's not like I'm an outsider observing it. I'm talking to the people I know. I know who has the best stories. I know who really knows their stuff. I know who's worth talking to. And that's what I'm doing in my movie. So I tagged it Inside the Crop Circle Mystery. And, I'm in love with my movie. I like the other one, but I like mine.
Yeah. One of the questions I always think of is, I know that there are some people out there that are actually making crop circles, and then there's the unexplained ones. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. The hoaxers, oh dear. They're the terrorists of the crop circle world, I tell you. I mean that. Or I don't know, maybe that's too strong an analogy. But they are very troublesome. And they're tricksters is actually too nice a word. That's kind of a sweet word. They're vicious, actually. And they are copying the real thing and trying to confuse everyone into thinking that the ones that they make are made by the mysterious source. And they've gotten better and better at it over the years. I mean, the first instance where that specter raised its head was early on in 2001. I have to remember my years here. In 2000, we had a spectacular, different. There were different circles than we'd ever had before. Prior to that, they had been rather simple. They'd been all circular. Elements in them were circular, like a circle surrounded by a ring, or several rings together, or circles together surrounded by rings, whatever. But in 1990, the pattern broke, and we got this spectacular. Actually, it's on the cover of What on Earth, my DVD, because it was such a turning point where the phenomenon broke out into a whole other design pattern. And then 1991, we had two spectacular early ones that still are state-of-the-art. Barbary Castle is what one of them is called. It's triangular shape. And the other one is called the Mandelbrot set. And that is the fundamental pattern from which fractals emerge. And then at the end of that season, all of a sudden, these two guys came along, and they're still world famous, you might say. I mean, still you run into people on the street and you say crop circles, and they say, oh, those two guys made them all. Doug and Dave, they are non-affectionately referred to. And they said they'd made them all, and we do a lot about that in my movie because the claim is so ridiculous. And, you know, I won't do spoilers here and tell you about the government involvement over there or whatever. But anyway, it was a ridiculous claim. But the world, it made the world press. And when you think about it, these are two farmers from the middle of nowhere. They're not significant. They're not important. They're not anything. And they get a press release out that makes the world press. It's on the, you know, because before that, this was a fascinating subject. The world was really interested in what might be going on. And after these two guys said, no, we made them all, the world dumped it. They just didn't care anymore. It was solved. And we talk about that too. You know how difficult it is really when you get serious about otherness for the mind to embrace it. Even though abstractly, oh yeah, most people now believe there's life elsewhere. I mean, this universe is so, I mean, beyond the beyond vast. And the likelihood is that there's life elsewhere, and everybody believes that, or pretty much everybody believes that. I mean, you can't not think that there's a likelihood of life elsewhere. You don't know for sure. But
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But when you come down to it being in your face, oh, that's another thing. Mm-hmm. You know, then it's like, well, wait a minute. Then you get very skeptical, very critical, very whatever. And when you get a solution, somebody says, oh, well, that's the way that worked. People made that, or the government, you know, did it, or it's not otherness. There's no otherness involved. It's such a relief to people that they don't really have to deal with that because it's a real deal. I mean, you have to really rethink reality, and not to mention the power structure has to rethink itself. A great challenge to the power structure if we're not the big cheese in the universe and something else is visiting us. So, people just, in the minute you get a place to kind of allay your concern, oh yeah, okay, it's explained, we don't have to think about that anymore. And you take a really ridiculous rationale and you accept it. And that's what happened with Doug and Dave. The world kind of lost interest, and ever since then, well, you know, the beautiful new things arrive. They're more beautiful all the time. They're more, and more evidence comes in that we're not making them. So the thing is quite alive, but at the same time, this hoaxing thing keeps it damped down because, again, it gives people a place to park their, concern. Oh, yeah, hoaxers make them all. Right. Well, wait a minute. How about looking at the evidence? You know, I'm not a patsy. I don't, fall for some idiotic line because I love to believe in extraterrestrials. No. I'm a very kind of scientifically oriented person, although I know there's a lot outside the realm of science that we need to incorporate in our worldview, that science is controlling us now, and there's a lot to be said about that. But nonetheless, I'm not an easy pushover. But when you look at the evidence, you go, well, wait a minute. The evidence is that we're not making them, or, that there's a real phenomenon. And then those hoaxers are just the spoilers. They come along and confuse you, and they're so nasty. Whenever I show up online, as I do many places, and I'm saying something positive, I can count on, if it's a chat, where other people can post, I can count on being attacked. And here's the favorite attack for me and anybody else who says anything positive online where people can respond. Oh, they're all fake or hoax. People make them all. You're just in it for the money. Mm-hmm. Martin, you have to laugh. If you saw this crop circle community of people who are dedicated to this thing, they're all scratching, Yeah. Nobody's getting rich. And you're in it, and me, believe me, I spent a lot more making this movie than this movie. You do little independent movies as passion projects. If you make money on them, God bless, but that's not why you do them. And I have not broken even yet. So that I'm in it for the money is, quite a ridiculous claim. But again, that's that's one of the sweeter things that the hoaxers say. Sometimes there's one set of opinions, I don't know, maybe it's true, that the real phenomenon is, the hoaxers say this, that the real phenomenon is inspiring them. They are the instruments, not the real phenomenon, but they are the instruments of something other. They are just, but they're making them all, but they're being guided. And I'm thinking, these reprehensible people, sure, God is, telling them what to do or whatever runs the universe, It doesn't add up very well.
Okay, so let's get back to what you said a minute ago, the evidence. Can you talk about what the evidence is?
Yes. When people ask me, what is the evidence, what are you basing your belief on fundamentally? Well, there's a lot of stuff you look for in the formations. You look for what the evidence the hoaxers leave, which is they do this with boards. And if your audience doesn't know, has never seen, the pictures of how they do it, we actually we've got some hoaxers in the movie. We just wanted to show you what they're doing. We've kind of got a long lens on some of them and watching them stomp away. So they have these 3-foot-long boards, and there are ropes attached to either side of the boards that they are holding in their hands. So they're holding, and the board is and they've got their feet on the board, a foot, on the board. And so they advance by steps with 1 foot on the board, crunching the crop down. Well, every place they crunch, they leave a crease mark. It's a little white mark. And so the first thing we look for when we go into a formation, we look for 3-foot-long white marks at footstep, lengths, and that is probably the most telltale sign that we can discern with our naked eyes. But people start flocking to these things when they arrive, and the material gets kind of mixed up, and it's not always evident that we've got these stomp marks. And there are a couple of other things you look for as well. But here's the definitive evidence, because you don't want to be fooled. We talk about that in the movie also. The worst thing for Americans, maybe it's everyone, is to be conned. We don't like to be conned, so we run the other way when anything possibly could not be true. So, but the real evidence for the crop circles is taking the material into the laboratory, and they've taken the plant material, they've taken the soil inside crop circles, and they've done this with scientific protocols. They do the crop. They take crop outside the circle. They take crop inside the circles. They're looking for comparisons, and what they've discovered in these very expensive scientific experiments is that there are biological changes to plants and chemical changes to soil that absolutely cannot be accounted for in our reality. And that really and science being the God that we take all of our authority from, well, we have the authority of science telling us that these circles are exhibiting evidence of non-human creation. And really, and there's a wonderful website. It's BLT, easy to remember because of bacon, lettuce, and tomato, but it's not that. BLTresearch.com. And they have all of the experiments. It's a fascinating website. And those things have been written up, and papers have been written on the experiments, and they've been published in peer-reviewed science journals. That's, the process of authenticating something in our world is science, papers, peer-reviewed science journals. And that's happened with several of these papers. So we've got the authentication of the way that we authenticate things in our world about the otherness of crop circles. And so, when everything else is, well, are there the marks? Aren't there the marks? Are these other signs there? We know now, if we could take everyone into the laboratory, we'd know which ones were hoaxed and which ones weren't. But it's very expensive to do. And actually, we've lost our main funder, who was Lawrence Rockefeller. From the Rockefeller family fortune, but he's the maverick, and he had his own foundation. He funded a lot of UFO stuff as well, right. and he funded a lot of that crop circle research. And unfortunately, he was an old man and presumably had a good life, but he left us a few years ago. So we lost our main source of funding for experiments there. But you don't really, the experiments were really to ascertain whether there was a real phenomenon. Once you proved it, you just don't have to keep proving it over and over again. But I'll tell you something else. We do that in the United States. We get very few of them here. England is the hot spot. They've been in about 40 other countries and maybe more. We haven't got an exact count because nobody's keeping official records anymore. We used to have a center, but there was so much dissension, mostly caused by this hoaxing thing, that the center dissolved, and there's no place collecting records. So we're kind of guessing at things. We guess at the fact that there have been maybe 5,000 formations since the late 70s, when we really started keeping track of them, and it was a full-blown phenomenon. Even though we go back hundreds of years for little flurries of things in the press of the day that you can point to and say, oh, that was our crop circles. But it didn't catch hold with the public until the 70s, and now we have this full-blown phenomenon. All right, so here in America, we have this rabid group of enthusiasts. And we do take every single one of them into the laboratory. They'll get on airplanes. They have a little conference every year in Ohio in April of every year of the little American group that is so passionate about them. And they'll fly on airplanes. They'll take the material into the laboratory. They've got simpler kind of stuff. It's not as expensive as the ones that Lawrence Rockefeller was funding. But nonetheless, they're valid, scientific criteria for discerning the same thing. Biological changes to the plants, chemical changes to the soil. And we've had an incident here in the States, for your States audience. You being States, I presume you have a large States audience. We've had several hundred over the years, going way back. There are records somehow that this group in the United States has. And this one, I don't know where in Ohio, but you could easily Google it because it was a big deal there. But interestingly enough, when there's an incident here in the States, and as I say, we don't get very many of them, it'll make the local press will go crazy wherever the incident is. All, kinds of the things you would expect in the press, what's going on, what's happening, taking pictures, whatever, but it doesn't make the national press. It's not interesting enough to the national press. But that incident in Ohio tested out. It's a lovely shape, it's a beautiful, and they've analyzed how the geometry works on it. These geometric ones, they're not all geometric, but the ones that are geometric are very complex. And they do analyses on them. That they do on all of them in England. They've got wonderful geometers over there that figure out how did they create the pattern. And in fact, it used to be early on that the hoaxers were terrible at geometry. When Doug and Dave were asked, well, how do you get your patterns? What's your relation to geometry? They said, geometry? They didn't know about that. They just made pictures. But gradually, or at some point over the years, the hoaxers acquired good geometers, so they now make patterns that actually you can't put them to the bad pattern test. The geometry is good in them. And this one in the States was really was beautiful, and none, accountable for. This is one of the genuine mysteries. It came in, I think, in November, beginning of November. Maybe end of October. I don't think so. I think it was something into November. So that was really quite exciting here. We haven't had any, in the last few years, any of note. This is the first good one in the last few years. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, we had some very good ones. I have a montage in my film that I call International Circles. The film is shot in England, the hotbed, where all the, every summer all the people from all over the world gather there. So that's where we shot the film over several summers. We went back. But the geometry on these is really sensational. In fact, when you ask the geometers in England whether they could make one as good as the geometry that we are getting now, what they say is, they're so clever about how they design these things. There's how does the compass and the straight edge make the lines, but there's also what's the idea, that how are they expressing art in wheat fields? Because let's just take fractals. Fractals is one of the main pattern groups. I told you that Mandelbrot, what they call the Mandelbrot set that came in 1991, was the basic pattern that fractals derive from. And then in 1996, we had our first pattern that would have been a derivation from this Mandelbrot core pattern. It was at Stonehenge. They call it the Julius set, from whatever the mathematical term is that refers to that pattern, or that names that pattern. And ever since then, we keep getting variations of fractal patterns. They never repeat themselves, but they do variations. But fractals are infinite. They go on forever. Mm-hmm. Well, you're in a wheat field. It's not going to go on forever. What do? Well, they very artfully figured out how to cap it, how to end it. And a geometer would show you, and they have done in the various presentations that are done, how they translated the infinity into a capped-off pattern, and they do it in all the fractals. So when you ask the geometers there, well, could you design a circle comparable to the best ones? They'll say, they're so clever about the idea that they're expressing. I don't know that we could do that. I mean, they're geniuses at creating a translation of something into a finite pattern, or into wheat or barley, or those are the main canvases, and canola. Those are the main canvases in England. But once they've cleverly designed something that kicks off a pattern group, we could probably do something like that. But these are the best geometers in the world, So believe me, we have even, do you know, Martin, that we've gotten geometric theorems that are in our literature from the crop circles?
Really?
Wow. Really. Gerald Hawkins, who was the head of the astronomy department at Boston University, who also did some fabulous work on Stonehenge, decoding the geometry there. He was very turned on by the circles. He's also left us, unfortunately. But he discerned that there were geometric theorems from a crop circle that we do not have in our literature, and we haven't now, derived from the crop circles. I mean, that's how really extraordinary the geometry is, just another indication of how extraordinary it is.
I saw a film a while back where there was an orb going through a field, and that's a possibility. People have talked about that.
Yeah, people are noticing orbs. Sometimes they see them and they film them. Sometimes they don't see them and they film them. I was at a conference once and we were watching somebody's footage that was, part of the presentation. And all of a sudden the audience gasped and said, "Oh, look at that." And the filmmaker hadn't seen it. It was an orb coming across a corner of the footage. That was just play with that, or it was just an orb coming across the corner. But we're interested in the orbs because there is play with them. We show you in my film somebody who actually saw one and filmed it. I got his footage, filmed it going across a field, and we have somebody talking in my movie about the orb he runs one of the crop circle groups in one of the counties that's outside the main counties that get them. And we show you a picture of a crop circle in a field, and he tells you the story of how the night before he was there watching the field out there, and he saw this orb going across the field. No, it was daytime, the day before. He saw this orb going across that field, and the next day there's a crop circle there. Well, that's not, the only time that sort of thing has happened. People spot the orbs, and then the next day there's a crop circle. So you wonder, is it a scouting mission? What is it? What's the relationship? And then there's one particular instance where I didn't use the footage because it's fuzzy. And, in a movie, you can only go so far with fuzzy footage. But it was shot by one of the people in the movie, actually. And when she explained what it was, and I'm looking at this fuzzy footage, oh yeah, I see that there. It's not in the movie, but what it is if you can picture somebody she was standing in a crop circle with her video camera, and she's filming people walking toward the circle. And the people do not see an orb that's over to one side. So you're watching, and on the left of what you're watching, you see this orb coming across the screen horizontally, and it's going to hit those people, or it looks like it will. Well, the people keep walking. They don't see it. The orb stops. The people keep walking. When the people pass, the orb picks up and continues horizontally across the screen. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Now, I put stuff like that on my blog. People should, sign up for my blog. I don't put out much, but everything I put out is fascinating. It's not just about circles. It's about this consciousness reality, this wake up to a new worldview that we are, hopefully coming into. My blog is theconversation.org, and people love being on my mailing list. They love reading these, anomalous sort of things, evidence of otherness, things that are outside the box that, point us to the fact that we're in a bigger reality than our worldview is Newtonian. It's all mechanistic. It's all cause and effect, right and wrong, dualistic. Mm-hmm. But science has actually validated a quantum reality. And in the quantum reality, everything's interconnected and interrelated and interdependent. But our worldview has not moved over to embrace that. So we're still stuck in this limited worldview, which, has given us all the good world of machines and whatever that we've got, but it doesn't really include things like consciousness and love and awareness and the things that are not definable under microscopes, So it's time for us to rethink our fundamental perspective on the world that we're in. And, the circles, being another outside the box kind of thing that would be incorporating the otherness also of, visitation of other intelligence out there. Science has no place for that. So right. Hopefully we're moving into a greater awareness. The circles will help us with that. All of these things that are not fitting in the current reality. That's how worldviews change. There's too much that contradicts the current status quo of your worldview, and then all of a sudden it turns inside out, and you're in a bigger worldview. I'm interested in that sort of thing. There's a lot of evidence of that sort of thing that I talk about, and I talk about it in my blog. How are we going to get out of this worldview and get into the next one?
Before we go here, we're getting near the end. Is there one thing that you didn't put in your movie that you wish you had?
Well, indeed. It actually is a formation that I was one of the first people in it. It came in 2001, and it was a response, presumably, to a message that we sent out into space 25 years before that to commemorate a telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, becoming the world's biggest telescope. And Carl Sagan had a hand in designing a message that got sent out, never expecting it to go anywhere. You know the way they plant those vials of all little evidence of what's going on Earth, so in a million years, if somebody digs it up, they know about us. Well, this was the same kind of thing. We sent it out into space with evidence of us. And it could, the way radio waves work, don't ask me too many questions, but it's binary code, and that can get translated into something on paper, a pattern.
Right.
And so we sent this thing out, and then 25 years later, arrived in a wheat field, clearly an answer to that, because what we sent out was about us. It was about our table of elements. It was about we're third planet from the sun. It was about how tall are human beings. You know, all kinds of translations, and that, you know, they'd understand who we were in some basic ways. And what came back was the evidence of them. So they are about 3 feet tall. They got big heads. They're carbon-based, they're silicon-based, not carbon-based. All different variations on what we sent out. And it's so fascinating. Nobody's ever claimed that to be a hoax. It arrived in a field where a week earlier or 10 days earlier, we'd had another startling formation, the likes of which we never had before or after, same with this one, which was, they call it the face. It looks like what we think of as the face on Mars, which I don't think is a real face, but that's what it looks like. I don't think that was evidence. I think that was just an accident, but that's my opinion. So we have this field with these two astonishing circles in it. I mean, there's more about the face. It was done in dot matrix, the way they do newspapers.
Right.
When you were in that, you got all these dots. What are all these dots? You had no way to know that it made anything you could see as a design that you'd recognize, except when you got above it. And just like in a newspaper, if you go in with a magnifying glass, it's all dots. But obviously, when you're looking at it, you know, from arm's length, it's newsprint, you know. So these fascinating ones, I mean, you could do a whole film about them. And in fact, there's a whole book that's been written. It's a pamphlet book, but it's a book nonetheless, about that Arecibo message, the message that came back. It's wonderful to look at. I mean, it's almost, it'd really be a shame, you know, to go on at great length about it here with people not being able to see it, because there's a lot online about it. And again, I put that out on my blog. But if you look for the message, I bet you could even call it the message crop circle in a Google. I'll bet you'd get it. And there's lots, I mean, it was really fascinating. We thought that was going to get the world's attention because it came in right after the biggest one that I talked about already, size of 2 football fields. That did get the world's attention. Real, you know, fascination of this is looking at the comparison of what we send out and what we got back. And the CNN was there for the giant one. And then I said, I'll bet my entire fortune that this one is going to bust the world wide open. Not just, oh, it's the biggest one ever, but okay, this is it. It's the otherness communicating with us. They paid no attention at all. It got no world press whatsoever. So I don't know where the 9/11 interfered. I don't know what interfered, but that was so. It's a good thing nobody took me up on my bed. I'm telling you, I would be a pauper today.
Well, you've been absolutely fascinating. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being on.
Well, Martin, let's send them to see my trailer at cropcirclemovie.com and at my irresistible offer to buy my DVD. But just see the trailer anyway. We want to turn everybody on. The trailer's wonderful, and it will turn you on to what are, you know, real mystery we have on our hands.
That's great. A real pleasure, Suzanne. And this is Martin Willis with Suzanne Taylor, and that's it for today.